you aware that someone near you might need your voice against the trafficking they are suffering? That is the question we're going to address today on Flourish-Meant. I'm your host, Tina Yeager. Flourish-Meant is part of the Spark Media Network and can be heard on the Edify app. Today we have with us Andi Buerger. She is a highly sought after international speaker, author, and advocate for those who cannot speak for themselves. She's a victim herself of child sex trafficking for 17 years. So she founded Beulah's Place and Voices Against Trafficking, an international nonprofit dedicated to eradicating human trafficking in the U.S. and abroad. So Andi, I am so grateful for the ministry you provide and that you are willing to come and share with us about how to be a part of God's voice against trafficking. Welcome, Andi.
Well, thank you so much, Tina. It's an honor to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your reasons for starting this. We heard in the intro that this was something that you suffered from. So talk to us about how God got you free from this and developed in you the courage and confidence to begin the ministries that you are now leading, because that's a long road after being a victim to becoming a leader, isn't it?
It is a very long road and definitely worthwhile, but not everyone is called to that, and I understand that. But to your point, yes, before there was a term called human trafficking, I was trafficked by immediate and extended family members from ages 6 months to 17 years old. And back in the early 60s and 70s, they just didn't have, any place to go. People weren't even talking about child abuse. It was kind of like swept under the rug, or the family secrets, you couldn't tell anybody, or they simply made sure that, the kids weren't near the predators. But when your family is the predator hub, then that makes it hard. So all that to say, by the time I was 5, Tina, I decided that I would just take my life, because my birth mother had made it clear that, I was the problem. I was the reason for all the issues in the family, and that she could take me out anytime she wanted to. So the abuse and the sexual things that were going on, and no way out, basically. I thought, I'll just jump in front of a car and then I'll be dead, and then I'll be at peace. No one will hurt me, touch me. I'll never have to go back into that house. And that is actually where God really met me. As I sat on that curb as a little 5-year-old girl, I was waiting and no cars came by that day. And then I looked up into the sky, and it was so huge and so blue. And I thought, I wonder how big that is. How far does it go? Did somebody make that big sky? And are they bigger than the people hurting me? And in that moment, I heard this voice from within my heart, loud and clear. And the voice said, "This is not the plan I have for you. And suicide is not the answer." And I felt that voice through my whole body. And I thought, I trusted that voice. I thought, there is somebody out there. And I went up to the garage, and I stood up against the door, and I said to no one in particular, "If you keep me alive, I'll do whatever you call me to do." Now, of course, I didn't know how painful and how long the road would be. So things got much worse. And the last time my birth mother tried to take my life, I was 17 years old. Yeah. And it still wasn't anywhere to run to, because again, if you were a minor, even when I reached out for help, they would say, well, you have to bring your parents. And if they're part of the problem, then the child has nowhere to go. And even today, all these years later, familial trafficking victims have a really hard time getting help, because the family bloodline protects them in a lot of courts and a lot of justice areas. People still want to send kids back to the mom or to the dad without really vetting out what is happening in that family. So, but to fast forward to your question, yes, so God took me on a road of education, business success. I thought, if I could be successful, somebody will have to love me. If I could just be whatever, then somebody somewhere down the road, may want me, may love me in a way that I wanted to be loved. Because as a kid, we just want to love and be loved. It's pretty simple. So after that, that's kind of how the journey began. And then when I married my husband 22 years ago, we both had a heart for teenagers and kids that were at risk. I mean, I'd always had a heart for kids that were like me or came through things like I did, but we decided we wanted to do something about that.
You were healed of all of those emotional wounds enough to be able to reach out and offer healing to teenagers. And did you find that they also had suffered abuse and wounds in their families of origin and they needed someone who understood them?
Absolutely. When Ed and I started Beulah's Place in 2008, I had suffered the fourth of 9 traumatic brain injuries, but that one in particular took me out of commission I lost like a year of memory. But what I did remember was serving dinners to homeless families at the senior center for Thanksgiving. And these young girls came in with brand new newborns, Tina. Oh my gosh. And they were living in their cars, as we found out. And I thought, somebody's got to help these kids on the street. And you're right. All of the kids that we have helped rescue. So that's how Beulah's Place began. We thought we'll feed them, we'll try to house them. We'll try to get to the root of why they're on the street. And the kids that we have helped ran from something worse than what they thought would be on the street. So we're not talking about the kids or the teens that, well, I didn't get dad's car for the weekend, or mom won't let me go to the mall, or it's not those kind of kids. Some of the kids on the street, they do choose that. They're rebellious, but that's really a minority. So the kids that we helped over the last 14 years, about 300 kids we've assisted in either rescue or housing. I would say a good number of them were trafficked, but all of them were sexually abused. All of them were physically abused. And along, of course, is mental and emotional abuse. So it's a variety of things. Some of them were forced into doing things they wouldn't have done, like being a drug mule, just so they could eat. And so that is the population that we wanted to serve and reintegrate to God's community.
Are you finding that there's a lot of misunderstanding in the family of God about what causes this, and especially the actual prevalence of this? Because this is a very well hidden secret, isn't it?
It still is. Even with all of the national headlines, the university scandals, you would think people would kind of wake up a little bit more to it. But I think especially in the church, they don't really know how to approach the topic, or how to bring up the fact that we can only have victims if we have predators. And guess what? They could be in the pew next to you, right? How do you say that? So I try and help pastors and anybody in any house of worship bring a story to the congregation and show the hope and the healing that can happen, like in my own life 6 decades later. And so you're right. There's a myth that, well, it doesn't happen in my neighborhood. It doesn't happen in our church or in our Sunday school, or it doesn't happen, down the road at the daycare. And that simply is not true. We know in the US that every 40 seconds, a child 18 years and under is abducted. That means they're taken or they're lured into a situation. It could be a hallway, it could be a basement, it could be a party, it could be the promise of a job or some money or whatever it is. And kids are curious, and that's why they're still kids. They're curious and they want to have their independence and do all these things. But if we refuse to talk about it in the churches, if we refuse to talk about it in the schools, we are doing a great disservice to the most vulnerable population and the future of our communities and the nation. Because all children, as Jesus said, let the children come to me. But if we don't let them come to us with, well, the teacher did this, or I'm being hurt, or I'm being bullied, or this person makes me feel bad, if we don't allow them to speak that, then we are doing the same damage basically the perpetrator is.
Wow, that is really compelling, and it is very convicting for those of us who are not being voices in our community for human trafficking, or may have ignored the situation or denied that it exists. So I'm going to take a break for just a couple of seconds. But when we come back, I want to talk with Andi about how we can learn to identify human trafficking and how we can get people to feel safe enough to come to us and ask for help, and how we can begin in our communities to provide the answers and solutions that are so needed for this widespread, worldwide, deep and evil problem that surrounds us. Welcome back from the break. Today, we're talking with Andi Buerger about human trafficking and how to be a voice against it. Welcome back, Andi. Can you begin to share with us? We had these horrible statistics of how prevalent this is and the fact that we often are not responding as well as we could. How can we begin to identify this secret issue that is so well covered up and hidden, even maybe in the next door neighbor's house or the pew next to you? How do we begin to identify this and create safe conversations where people can feel comfortable sharing that this is happening to me?
Absolutely. First of all, one of the simple things is to simply say, I want to know more, so I'm not part of the problem, that I'm part of the solution, and that my neighborhood is part of the solution, and my community and my state, and on and on. And when we do that, when we acknowledge, okay, I hear there's this huge elephant in the room. Now what do we do about it? Because I don't want my niece or grandchild, grandson or granddaughter, because boys and girls are at risk, maybe not quite equally, but up there, because gangs and cartels and just residential predators, as we call them, they're all interested in any human that they can manipulate, coerce, sell, use for profit or for depravity. So let's get back to the basics. Yes, how do we look at this? When I was younger, I was dragged to church a few times, and I would never give people eye contact in public. I would hold myself very tightly. I didn't want to be touched. I didn't want to have anyone anywhere around me who might sense that there was a problem, because I knew what would happen to me at home. I was so controlled by my predators, and yes, they were family members, but even for the victims that aren't being controlled by family members. So, here's an example. We have a lot of dysfunctional families in life, and that's not a judgment. It's just the way it is. We have pressures. We have all this stuff. There's divorce, there's drug addictions. There's all kinds of stuff. One of the girls we rescued about 8 years ago, her father was a religious leader in the community, and he was the one that violated her while she was very young. Her mother finally divorced him, became an alcoholic, and then she hooked up with an older boyfriend and decided that he was more important than her daughter. So from the ages of 12 to 16, this girl was left alone 6 days a week with frozen food in the freezer for her meals. And that was it. And the mother only came home if the school called, or if, the girl tried to commit suicide, which she did a couple of times. That's the only time that mother gave that girl care. So naturally, in that age bracket, some friend came up to her and said, hey, come on over to my house. I have a way to take all your pain away. And so she started with pot, got into some other drugs that she never would have chosen to do otherwise. And so she continued on. She maintained a 3.2 GPA at school. Amazingly, she rehabbed herself. But by the time we got her, she called into our shelter and was on her last leg. She hadn't eaten for a couple of days. She was living in a place where there were 9 other adults and children, and they were being charged $100 a night to sleep on the floor. So that was the only housing she had. Now, see, didn't find out till later that when she was 17, she had been approached by a woman who was 30. So you have a 17-year-old and a 30-year-old woman. Well, guess what? The woman bought her gifts, and she took her to lunch, and she took her shopping and created this grooming situation, luring her into a confidence of safety. She gave her attention, which the girl hadn't had. And then suddenly it was like, hey, I have friends coming into town. They're staying at the local motel, and I want you to meet them. And on that night, everything changed for her. And the woman said, you will be the one that goes to jail if you tell anybody about what happened. And the woman took all the money. So, it sounds like, well, that's just, an extreme example, but it is not. We have over 300 kids that we have worked with, teenagers, and they're all fighting for a chance to have the purpose and the hope that they thought they had when they were an innocent child. And now they're just struggling to be part of life, part of community, and hoping someone will intercede. So for our part, we need to open a conversation at church, maybe among the leaders first, and then figure out how to present to congregations and audiences, have a town hall, so to speak, in your area. It doesn't have to be formal. It has to be someone, like I speak all the time to different groups, and I'm happy to do that because I'd rather have people know, look, here are the things you can do. We have hotlines and helplines. You can put those in your phone today. You can have your teenager put those numbers in their phone today. If they see something, they can say something safely, anonymously, neutrally, and get help. If they're in trouble, they can call. But also, I advocate for the safe word system. So for example, Tina, in your family, if you have kids, I would say, well, you guys need to come up with a word or phrase that only your immediate family knows. This way, when your child starts socializing, or they go over to a slumber party, or they go off to, high school, if they're in trouble, or they feel like they're being threatened, or there's something that doesn't feel right to them, they can text you that, and immediately you have to go help them or get help for them. But again, that's something the family has to agree to only use in those particular times. So that's kind of a safe, non-public way to let your kids communicate with you. Same with grandparents and guardians. And it sounds simple, but it really does work. We've had a lot of great situations where that was the one thing where the adult was like, something's wrong. I don't know what it is, but I'm going to go get my teen or my child or whatever from the piano teacher or from the gym. And so that's really simple to do, but we have to educate our communities about the things to look for. And we also have to hold our local law enforcement accountable for prosecuting, for bringing in speakers that can teach more about the topic, for doing everything they can to protect your children of that community. And believe it or not, even in my county, the district attorney will not prosecute human trafficking because he doesn't believe it exists.
Wow, that's really alarming. And
It
is. But as individuals, are there ways that we can help people feel safe when they've been through that process of grooming, and those who tried to get their trust abused their trust? How can we get them to open up to us and tell us what's going on when it's really hard for them to trust?
It is very hard. That, to me, even though a lot of people say it's a miracle you're alive, and that's true, but for me, the miracle is that I trusted that voice when I was 5, and I've never given up on that. But for people that have been groomed, we need to vet out, okay, if that's a summer job that my teen wants to get, who are the people involved in that job? Where are they going to be? What time? Do a little more due diligence. And we're all busy. Parents are working multiple jobs. We get that. But at the end of the day, do you want to come home to your child the way you left them? Or do you want to come home and either not have a child or have that child harmed in a way you can never reverse? So my thought is that yes, we want to vet out more. Who is the piano teacher's husband? Oh, okay. Who is Jane or Joe's friends? And what about their brothers and sisters? Are they safe? The predator today, Tina, looks like your dentist or the librarian. It's not the gruff and rugged ones that you see in the movies all the time. I mean, they can be, but generally the predator will look just like a normal parent or a normal adult. And they're looking for product. And so we need to have that conversation with our kids that says, we're not trying to police you. We're trying to protect you and help you protect yourself when we're not there. So let's talk about this issue called human trafficking, because in America, it's almost overtaking drug trafficking as the #1 illegal activity. And we can't have trafficking if there's no demand. No demand, no supply, no profit. And so For our churches, I wish that every church would give me and other speakers that I know the opportunity to share how we can present this and gently get their congregation to get involved. Go to a local youth center, help out there, watch for things. Are kids in the bathroom too long, or do they look like they're disenfranchised from the rest of the group? That kind of social body language that we know. Is there someone hanging around the parking lot that you don't recognize? I mean, are you looking at your environment where you are and where children are, whether they're yours or not? I'm always looking at who's walking down the street alone without a parent or without, some kind of guardian. And I just pray for those kids. A lot of kids walk to school alone. They walk to the swimming pool, alone. They walk to a lot of places alone or ride their bikes. But where is their safety net? And that's what we have forgotten to do for our kids, I feel.
Teaching the kids around you that they are loved by Christ,
Yes.
and continuing to bring that message of love and acceptance is really important toward garnering a place of safety and trust where they could eventually maybe share, this is what's going on with me. And if they are withdrawn, not pressuring them to tell, because
Right.
that's terrifying to someone who's been threatened about telling, but just telling them
Absolutely.
this, that if someone's hurting you, and you don't have to tell me if you're uncomfortable, if someone's hurting you, that's not okay. And they shouldn't be allowed to do that. And if you ever need to get help, you can ask us here and we are safe. And communicating those messages to all the teens, not just specific ones, is very important, because you don't necessarily know which teens might be at risk. So I think we need to create places where kids are safe and are told this kind of touch is not okay. These kinds of ways of being treated are not okay. And if this is happening to you, you can tell us and we will do everything we can to get you advocates who will help you.
Absolutely. That one, it's not their fault. Two, that whatever happens, we do love them and God loves them, and that this is not God's way. I don't know how it happened, God's divine love, but I knew at a very early age that he did not cause the harm, that he gave each person free will. And in my case, those people chose to do evil. You can do evil, you can do nothing, which is to me just as bad as evil, or you can do something. And that's what we want people to do, and to not judge our children if they come to us with something that sounds outlandish. Maybe there's a little exaggeration, but remember, they're emotional. They have all of these feelings about somebody making them feel uncomfortable or trying to touch them, or maybe they already did touch them, or maybe they grabbed them and, pushed them around, whatever it is. We want our churches, our social organizations, our families to be open enough to say, no matter what my child, whatever age they are, no matter what they tell me, I will receive it in love and ask God for wisdom, and we will work it through together. And if a child knows that, if I had had anyone intercede on my behalf, I would have just been a whole different, being. But here I am trying to help others and other families and communities get the idea that we have to let our children feel safe, like you said. Every Sunday school class, no matter what age, every educational class, no matter what age, even in college, repeat, repeat, repeat. You have the right to be the human you're designed to be. Someone tries to threaten that right, physically, mentally, whatever, then please talk to and have the resources available.
Yes. And they should be able to talk about when they're sensing discernment that something is wrong. Even if it's in those early stages of grooming and it's making them uncomfortable, they need to be able to say something's wrong. And they may be misreading someone, and that's fine. But just to be able to be on the safe side and kind of give some distance between them and that person that's making them uncomfortable. It's so much better to be safe than sorry than to allow our kids to go into that. So that is so important. And I love that you brought out that issue of the child, the victim, being blamed by the perpetrator, so that the perpetrator never takes responsibility. It's always the shame on the victim. So you're going to experience, when you see these kids, they will be either visibly showing a great deal of low self-esteem or shame, or they will be hardened because they have grown so worn down by that shame that they'll appear to be rough even though
Yes.
really the issue is that they have been beaten down by shame and they've just hardened themselves against it.
Absolutely. Most of the kids that were more challenging that, we have helped and we knew where it was coming from, they didn't at the time. But, we worked through it was because they had been so hurt and all that hate, all that ugliness that was poured into them, would come out at certain, like in bursts, even though most of them had counseling or whatever they needed. But here's what most folks don't understand. Once you have been victimized like that, especially in a sexual way, which is I feel the most intimate violation of your entire being. But it's a life sentence for that person because you can't undo that. You can never undo that, but we can get new normals in our life. We can get healing and redemption through the Lord. We can be new creatures. We can be transformed. Even at my age, I still sometimes deal with PTSD, old issues in a new face or place. So we have to teach folks that have been traumatized in any way, especially our children, that we are going to love them through and walk the journey. When my husband was courting me, one of the things he said was, Andi, I don't understand everything that happened to you, but here's what I can tell you. I will never leave you, and I will always listen. We don't do enough listening, not only to our kids, but sometimes to each other. And there are a lot of walking wounded, Tina, and out there in our churches, in communities that have been hurt, and they don't feel like they're either good enough or that anyone will listen to them without judgment. And honestly, where do we get the right to judge anyone for their pain?
That is so important for everyone to understand. And I really appreciate the wonderful ministry and the wonderful truths that you are bringing out and the advocacy that you are offering for those who don't have a voice. How can listeners get in touch with you and learn more about the programs that you're offering, the speaking opportunities, your book, and your ministries to help bring some of that information to the churches and the communities and the supportive people in their neighborhoods and cities that need to be those first responders who understand?
Absolutely. First thing, they can go to voicesagainsttrafficking.com. Voicesagainsttrafficking.com has helplines and hotlines that I spoke about earlier, so they can get, there's like 12, whether it's suicide prevention or child abuse or suspected trafficking, any of that is on that tab. They can also, we are a 501c3 nonprofit. If they don't know what to do or they're not ready to do something, at the very least, they can either donate or buy our new book, Voices Against Trafficking, the strength of many voices speaking as one, because collectively we are much more powerful against this war for our children and for the victims that we have yet to find together than just as one voice. And so that book has 20 chapters, all different perspectives from media, from how to keep your kids safe on the internet to other stories of survivor leaders and what they went through. And they're also doing the work like I am. And so there's all different perspectives to open conversations. When you travel, what do you look for? So all of that is in that book. So every library, home, church, school, law enforcement, wherever should have a copy of that book just so they can go and say, wow, I didn't know this, or, oh, here's how we can be better at this. And so that's one tool. We also have quarterly forums. Our next one is March 30th, and then the next one after is June 29th. Free on Facebook, free on YouTube. We have phenomenal top voices from all over the world that come and speak, and we're going to have quite the program coming up. We have a young man who's 14 who's brave enough to say, hey, why don't we have this in school? Why isn't anyone talking about this at my level? Right? So we're going to have a great program that's free for people to watch it and learn from. So we're doing as much as we can to create greater awareness. We are working with members of Congress on both sides, and we are not going to stop until we get at least our immediate communities and our nation back on the same page that our children are not to be sold and exploited. Any victim is not to be left unattended to. Like the Good Samaritan, we need to be the one that stops and sacrifices a little of ourselves so that someone else can live or become whole again.
Thank you so much, Andi. I hope that all of you listening feel like you have learned and you can grow into becoming more of God's voice in your community against trafficking. And of course, I also hope that you come back for the next episode of Flourish-Meant. Flourish-Meant is part of the Spark Media Network and can be found on the Edify app.